thanks for joining. We're back here. We're going to do the second part in the series of IVF videos. And we're really going to start from, okay, we decided we're going to do IVF, but what now? And I think that's probably a question that almost everybody would find themselves with. At the end of the day, it's one of those things that obviously you do for the first time at some point, and you want to make sure that you kind of do it right. So the first thing first, when you go in, they're going to go through and do some preliminary tests. And for us, they started off with blood work, and I got 1 vial, and Natalie had 8. Again, she's really no stranger to blood work, but in this case, obviously mine was much easier. And then also on the male side of things, because I hope that all males realize that they have a part in this as well, and it's not just kind of easy peasy on both sides of things. So you need to make sure that everything on the male side is working. So they're going to do a semen analysis and let you know kind of where you stand. And we're going to say this a lot, but you've got to recognize that no matter what happens, it's not a complete roadblock. It may or may not just be a hurdle. For us, luckily, we didn't have that hurdle, but recognize that there are probably lifestyle decisions and choices that you guys are making now that you might think are good choices just for general health and well-being, but at the end of the day, they could impact your reproductive health.
Yeah, so for me, so my preliminary workup, like he said, I had blood work done. They also did an SHG to check for any uterine abnormalities, to see the shape of my uterus, as well as to see if I had any fibroids. And then for me, they also did an endometrial biopsy just to check, the thickness and things like that. And whenever he was in there looking at my uterus, he noticed. So 8 weeks prior was when we had our miscarriage. So when he was in there, he saw that I still had, some remnants of that pregnancy in there. So he did scrape that off as well. The SHG was my second one. It really, wasn't a bad. So don't be, scared of having the procedure done. It's really not a big deal. It's maybe a little bit of cramping, a little bit of discomfort. The endometrial biopsy, I'll be honest, it was uncomfortable. And it was painful, but it's a biopsy, and you aren't numbed, and I didn't take any pain medicine for it, so that is painful. But other than that, and I'm assuming most of you won't have retained pregnancy parts in your uterus, so you don't even have to worry about that aspect of it. So it's something you just have to go through. But if you're at the step of wanting to do IVF, and you've try to conceive naturally, this is kind of a small price to pay, I guess you can say. And you've probably already done lots of other tests down the road to get to this point, so it's nothing new.
And the fact of the matter is, too, not only is it a small price to pay, I feel like paying, although I can't really say that because I didn't have to go through it, but it was one of the only things that she complained about. It also, don't get caught up on the physical cost of some of those things, because this is peanuts compared to the next steps.
Mm-hmm.
So the few $100s or whatever, don't worry about making sure that your baseline is good, because without a good baseline, you're not going to go anywhere. And the fact of the matter is, you need to, again, be ready for some of those hurdles to come up and understand what decisions you may need to make in the event that you do actually run into any of those hurdles. So for instance, I mentioned on the male side of things, you need to make sure that the semen health is all there and ready to go. I personally, like I said, didn't have any issues, and I mentioned that you may be making some lifestyle decisions that you may think are good. So for me, I'm an avid cyclist, but Natalie always kind of joked, and I guess not necessarily yelled at me, but kind of always gave me kind of the business for going out and riding my bike for extended periods of time, saying that it was going to affect our chances of having babies. That is possible. The science there is not all that strong, but I imagine that there are also some other things out there. Like obviously, I think everybody's probably watched a movie or two when they tell you don't go into a hot tub. That's one of those things. It's a lifestyle choice, but make sure that you understand in general that there are some things that could come up that you need to make decisions around if one or the other partner is not really given the green light. So for instance, you may need to look into a donor on one side or the other. Everybody's not comfortable with that. We recognize that in certain parts of the world and religions, obviously, that may not be acceptable. But you need to make sure you have that discussion, because obviously when you get to that point, you need to be able to make a quick decision based on obviously your timeline and everything else like that. So don't get frustrated if it takes an extra month. If you happen to be sick, don't push on and hide it from your provider. I mean, that would be the worst decision you could possibly make. Have a discussion with your provider, figure out what the really the best path forward is, and kind of move on in the right direction.
Yeah, and I guess along the lines of what he just mentioned, you know, obviously this is a little bit further, but I'll kind of jump ahead. So when we did the transfer, leading up to the transfer, I had spotting, which obviously, you know, you want your lining nice and thick. So, you know, I didn't hide that from the provider. I mean, yes, you know, obviously in my head, you know, I wanted our transfer date to not get moved, because if you move the transfer date, obviously you're going to get pregnant later and the baby's going to come later. But, you know, we immediately reached out to the doctor and, you know, let him know that I was spotting, and he had us come in and they checked the lining, and everything was fine, and, you know, the spotting went away, and I, you know, didn't get my period. But definitely don't hide those types of things from your provider, because if there is an issue and if my lining wouldn't have been, you know, where it needed to be, and, you know, let's say I did start my period, I mean, obviously it's not the time to transfer a baby when you're not ready for accepting the pregnancy. So definitely, you know, don't have in your mind, you know, this needs to happen now, and kind of have blinders on, you know, be open with your provider. And then also be prepared, you know, the legal aspects. So they'll have you fill out paperwork where you'll make decisions, you know, if we were to get divorced, who gets the embryos. If I were to die, or if, you know, Ari were to die, what happens to the embryos? If we both die, what happens to the embryos? Do they go to science? Do they get discarded? Do they get donated? Or does someone else in the family get the embryos? Those are decisions you probably you will have to make. But probably a good idea to kind of talk about those things before you head down, so you don't start an argument in the doctor's office.
And honestly, I mean, I had no idea that you were going to have to sign anything like that going into it. Not that we really had any problems making those particular decisions. And I think I saw recently somebody else had posted something, I don't know, maybe I overheard Natalie listening to some blogger on Instagram or something, talking about how it was weird that you have to make those decisions. But if you really think about it, it's kind of a pretty important decision. We'll talk a lot about the cost of everything later on. I'm going to mention that here in a moment. But obviously, each office is going to have a price for freezing embryos. So you're going to know that going into it. So you're spending the money, you want to know kind of where things are going to go. So we're going to have, the next video will be all the way up to the retrieval. But after that, we keep mentioning we're going to talk about costs specifically, and we're going to be able to talk about costs with insurance and without insurance. We had some odd stuff going on where insurance wasn't very clear with us, so we kind of had to go in two different directions. So we learned both of those things, but we haven't decided on an order for those two, the with and the without insurance. So if you have any requests, please let us know, and we'll be happy to follow any of those requests or answer questions in the meantime. So please let us know if you have any questions, and until next time, thanks for watching.